Right, well, good evening everybody. Everybody well? Are you ready for this? Here we are again. These years roll round, don't they? One after the other. They seem to get quicker and quicker, don't they?
That's a sign of age.
It's a sign of age. It probably is. So we're going to look back at 2019. You're probably thinking, well, don't look back at 2019. Look back at just the last few days, because what an amazing few days we've experienced in this new year that started. There's so much tension, isn't there, in the Middle East, and we will try and bring this whole thing bang up to date. The events are clearly very fast moving, and as you know, I'm doing this talk this evening, further events could be unfolding. We're right on the brink of it. A brother phoned me up, when was it now? Sometime middle of last week, and I was talking to him, and he said, Andy, he said, you know, we used to say that we live by faith, but now he said, surely we live by sight. And he's probably right, isn't he? That faith has almost become defunct with all the things that we're seeing. All the things that Brother John Thomas, all those years ago, when the whole world of Christadelphia began, and under his initial amazing discovery of the truth, much of what he wrote about with incredible foresight back then is happening before our very eyes, isn't it? And so we don't really have to live by faith anymore. There'll be zero excuse, won't there, when Jesus gets back shortly, for us to say, well, that's taken me by surprise. I had no idea that you were about to return. The world seemed a long, long way off. There was no events happening that made me think, yes, Jesus is on the cusp of coming. We've got no excuse. And surely God, in his mercy, has written all the things down that we're going to look at with one aim in mind. Well, probably two aims in mind. One is just to help increase our faith. And the other one is just to make sure that we are ready. I mean, we're living in a terrifying world where morals are collapsing probably far lower than we ever imagined that they would. And, you know, men's hearts are failing them for fear, aren't they, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. We've got an enormous amount to get through. I'm hoping we can get through it. We'll see how we get on. Normally we used to split this into 2 nights, didn't we, Luke? But we decided to try and do it all in one night. So I don't know if you've got sleeping bags, pillows with you. We'll see how we get on. When you've had enough, just say. But there is quite a bit to canter through. So what I thought we'd do to start with is just put on the screen, there's a map, not of the entire world obviously, but it's of a good chunk of the world, and the world that effectively surrounds Israel there. And here's some of the key players. So we've got at the top there Vladimir Putin in Russia, been in power now for 20 years, almost exactly. We've got our new Prime Minister who's been in power not much more than 20 days. With Boris Johnson. We've got President Trump, who's been in power for about 4 years. We've got President Erdogan of Turkey there, who's been in power some time. We've got Benjamin Netanyahu there in Israel, who's struggling, isn't he? Israel's had at least 3 elections in the last few years, and another one on the cards. He's sort of weakened. We've got Trump, of course, that's in the process of being impeached. We've got Bashar al-Assad there, who runs Syria as a dictator, and the Syrian conflict rumbles along. We've got the Ayatollah Khamenei there, who has very much been in the news the last few days. And we've got there the King of Saudi Arabia, and I've forgotten his name. Anyway. It might come back to me, but there he is. We recognise him there. So there's some of the players. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to put the faces up on the screen like this, because I've just got this feeling that we could be looking at the very faces that are in power when Jesus comes back. Things are so... I mean, we might be wrong. Time might still go on. But surely with events as they are, being fulfilled at the rate that they are, is there not a possibility that we are looking into the eyes of the very people who are on their thrones, if you like, when Jesus comes back. Do we think that's a possibility? Could be, couldn't it? We're looking at the very people that exist when Christ returns. That's how close things really, truly are. So what we're going to do to start with is look at the world through Israel's eyes. I thought that's probably, Israel's the centre of it all. And really, even when we get on to other things, Israel's still part of the story. But what does Israel see? How do they perceive things that are happening? So we're going to think about Israel and Russia. We're going to think about Israel and Syria and Iran and the Palestinians and the Gulf states. So let's just see what's been going on in the last 12 months, shall we, in relation to Israel. So the first thing that I thought we'd have a look at there is have a look at Israel and Russia. So what verses are there that might tell us about Israel and its relationship with Russia? Well, we've got obviously some real key passages here. So this is Ezekiel 38 verses 8 and 9, and we know this very, very, very well, because this is talking, if Jesus was to come back now, the man that would be in power of Russia, of course, would be Vladimir Putin. And in Ezekiel 38 it says, in the distant future, now bearing in mind, and I think sometimes we forget this, the whole of Ezekiel 38 is addressed to one person. And who is that one person it's addressed to? Gog. And Gog isn't a power, Gog is a human being. Gog is a person. It might be worth just having a look at this. So Ezekiel 38. And verse 1 says, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him. Gog is a human being, is a man. And as we realise that Magog, Meshech and Tubal are all areas of modern-day Russia, Gog must be the ruler of modern-day Russia. Therefore, this whole chapter, when you read it, it says him, all the way through. The whole lot is being addressed by God to the ruler of Russia. So when it says in the distant future, you will sweep down, this is talking about Russia coming down, but headed up by Gog, the Russian ruler. And at the moment, of course, that's Vladimir Putin. And could there be any better character to fit in somebody that we'd expect to be Gog? If it isn't him, it's going to be somebody almost identical to him as to be him. Anyway, it says, in the distant future, you'll swoop down on the land of Israel, which is going to be enjoying peace after recovering from war, and after its people have returned from many lands to the mountains of Israel. You and your allies, a vast and awesome army, will roll down on them like a storm and cover the land like a cloud. This is from a modern translation, but I've put that up because it gives us a sense, doesn't it, straight away, of what really Russia is going to be about. So whatever we're looking for, we're not looking for Putin to be the best friend of Russia. We're looking for Putin, even if it's behind the scenes, to be against Israel and supportive of Israel's enemies. Would that be fair enough? Also, in the same chapter, in verse 10, it says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. And this is actually telling us about what Gog himself, the Russian ruler, is even going to think. God knew 2,500 years in advance what somebody's brain was going to think. That's pretty clever. It says, this is what the sovereign Lord says, at that time evil thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise a wicked scheme. You will say, Israel is an unprotected land filled with unwalled villages. I will march against her and destroy these people who live in such confidence. I will go to those formerly desolate cities that are now filled with people who have returned from exile in many nations. I will capture vast amounts of plunder, for the people are rich with livestock and other possessions now. They think the whole world revolves around them. That is quite a modern translation, but the sense of it is there. The other passage that we could also look at in relation to all of this is, of course, in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. Because this is the parallel passage to Ezekiel 38 that expands from verse 40 to the end of the chapter about exactly the same events as Ezekiel 38. And it doesn't take long to piece those two puzzles together because so many of the words are identical. But here we've got, it doesn't talk about Gog. However, if you want to just flick over to Daniel chapter 11, personally, I truly believe that Gog is mentioned in Daniel 11. So if you look at Daniel 11, verse 36, it talks about a king that exists at the time of the end. We know the king exists at the time of the end because verse 36 says the king will do according to his will and exalt himself and magnify himself above every god and will speak marvellous things against the God of gods, and he's going to prosper until the indignation is accomplished. He won't regard the God of his fathers in verse 37. He'll magnify himself above all. In his estate he'll honour the God of forces. He's a military man. This man is also loving and honouring gold, silver, precious stones and pleasant things and so on. And at the time of the end, we're told in verse 40, the king, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at this man. And this is a description from verse 36 to 39 of exactly the same man in verse 1 and 2 of Ezekiel 38, i.e. it's a description of Gog. It isn't a description of the Pope, it isn't a description of Turkey, it's a description of the man himself. And if you want to compare those few verses to Daniel chapter 8, you'll find that Gog is also mentioned there. This is another thing to look at when you have chance, and you'll find all the same words are replicated and the themes. So look, the king of the north is going to storm out with chariots and charioteers and a vast navy. He will invade various lands, sweep through them like a flood, and he's going to enter the glorious land of Israel, and many nations will fall, but Moab and Edom and the best part of Ammon will escape. He will conquer many countries, and even Egypt will not escape. So we know categorically Russia is going to be against Israel at the time of the end. And amazingly, of course, John Thomas, back 150 or so years ago, in Elpis, Israel, the hope of Israel, worked out that Gog and Magog and Meshach and Tubal were Russia, and worked out that they would be coming down, and said the future movements of Russia are notable signs of the times because they're predicted in the scriptures of truth. When Russia makes its grand move for the building of its image empire, then let the reader know that the end of all things, as at present constituted, is at hand. So when you see Russia making moves, get yourselves ready, said John Thomas 150 or so years ago. And have we seen Russia starting to make moves? We have, haven't we? There they were, locked in their boundaries. In fact, they shrunk from the USSR into Russia as we know it. And suddenly, in the last few years, out they've come pushing forth and ended up, as we know, in Syria and got their fingers in many places in the Middle East, as we'll see. So there's some background to Russia and Israel. So what headlines have we seen during the last 12 months in relation to that? Shall we have a look? So as most of you will know, I do this weekly World Watch. Every week I've done it pretty much since 2003. And this is what a weekly World Watch slide looks like if you haven't seen it. So there's the headline. There's where the headline's from. That's Israel in News on the January the 18th last year. This is, the stuff in black is word for word how the article starts. Totally unedited. It's what is in the newspaper or online. The stuff in blue is my bit of what I've said. And down the bottom here is a Bible quote to say why all of this headline and event might be interesting. And clearly I'm going to misinterpret things and maybe pick out some events that aren't relevant. But, you know, you're trying to do your best to see what's going on. So let's have a look at some of these things. So this is almost a year ago now. Russia to Israel No more airstrikes on Damascus airport. Russia has sent a message to Israel that it would not tolerate further airstrikes in the vicinity of the Damascus International Airport. And what you're going to find is that lots of these headlines that I put up here are from Israeli press. So we don't hear about this in the Telegraph or the Times or the BBC, but Israel does report how Russia is really being antagonistic against them. And there was one headline. Israel must stop Syria strikes, Moscow says. That was in February the 8th last year. Russia reportedly interfered with air navigation in Israel. That was in the Jerusalem Post on June the 28th. Senior Israeli officials say they believe that Russia has been disrupting civilian aircraft navigation systems for the past 3 weeks, according to reports released on Thursday. Russia lets Iranian forces redeploy opposite Israel. That was in Depka file. That was on August the 14th. So Russia allowing Iranian military to get very, very, very close to the northern Israeli border there. Russia warns against annexing the Jordan Valley. So Russia wasn't happy about reports that Israel was thinking about annexing some of the West Bank, and was basically saying to Netanyahu, no, we're not going to tolerate you doing that. In the Jerusalem Post on November the 21st, Russia criticises Israel for gross violation in Syria. Russia accused Israel of violating the sovereignty and international integrity of Syria and other states in the region, and stated that such developments are of the most serious concern and are rejected by Moscow. So all these comments are coming out from the Kremlin, and surely we can see, we know which side Russia is on, and it is not on Israel's side. Putin himself plays a very, very delicate game of balance at the minute, doesn't he? Trying to pretend to stay friendly with Israel, while at the same time arming rapidly and helping and supporting nations like Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, who are all arch enemies of Israel. How can you play both sides like that? And clearly we know where it's going to end up. So that all seems to be falling into place if you're looking for it, and as I say, the Israeli press really do make that clear. But what about Israel and Syria? So at the moment, Putin seems a long way off. There's much, much more trouble close to home, isn't there, for Israel as we speak at the minute? And Syria is on their doorstep. So what does the Bible say about Israel and Syria? And if you look at Christadelphian writings, there's practically nothing said about this. Practically nothing at all. It's sort of a bit buried away. But I believe that there are passages that talk about Israel and Syria. For one thing, I don't believe that Syria is mentioned at all in Ezekiel 38. There's a great void where you would imagine Syria itself would have been mentioned. But the closest to Syria would be ancient Persia. But at the time that Ezekiel wrote, Persia was a long way off from where modern-day Syria is. So I don't think Syria is mentioned at all in that Ezekiel 38 chapter. But here is a chapter where I think it is mentioned, and that's in Isaiah 17 that we've looked at before in many previous years. So in Isaiah 17, it says that the city of Damascus is going to be destroyed. This version says it's going to disappear. It is going to come to an end. And Damascus is the capital city of Syria. And it lays claim to be the longest inhabited city on planet Earth. That is the claim of Syria if you look on Wikipedia. But God says it's going to come to a complete and utter end. And despite the destruction that we've seen over the last, sort of 8 years now, Damascus has not come to a complete end. It will do. And what we also read, when the Damascus disappears and becomes a heap of ruins, the towns of Aroer, which are actually towns in Jordan, will also be deserted. Flocks will graze in the streets and lie down undisturbed, with no one to chase them away. And the fortified towns of Israel, it doesn't say Israel in the AV actually, it says Ephraim. But Ephraim is code for northern Israel. So the fortified towns of northern Israel will also be destroyed, and the royal power of Damascus will end. This has to happen at some point. Damascus hasn't come to an end. And either it's sort of a symbolic speak from God to say, well, it's not really coming to a total end, but it's sort of going to be pretty smashed up. I don't think he's absolutely categoric when he says it will come to a complete end. And therefore, when Syria comes to a complete end, or Damascus does, and the royal power is removed from Damascus, so in other words, the government has gone from Damascus, something terrible happens to northern Israel, specifically northern Israel, because Ephraim is singled out, which is talking about northern Israel. This is still to happen. There's still something to happen between Syria and Israel. So I'm now looking for headlines that say to me there's a problem between Israel and maybe Damascus itself. Would you think that's a good thing to look for? Seems to me to be a good thing to look for. Here we are, look. Israeli jets target Damascus airport warehouse. This is in Al Jazeera, January the 12th, last year. Syria says Israel carried out strike and claims to have intercepted their missiles. That was in the Times of Israel, May the 17th last year. Israel jets hit Iranian targets in Homs and Damascus. That's in the BBC, July the 1st. I'm just going to play you a little bit of a video clip coming up now of some of those events.
Nearly a dozen dead and several others injured in Wednesday's airstrikes on Syria, which Israel said came in retaliation to rocket fire on the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights on Tuesday. The airstrikes targeted both Syrian and Iranian allied forces. Israel's Prime Minister acknowledged targeting Iranian interests within the country.
I've made it clear that whoever harms us, we will harm them. That's what we did last night against military targets of the Iranian Quds Force and Syrian military targets in Syria. This followed a barrage of rockets that were fired at Israel on Tuesday. We will resolutely continue to defend Israel.
So there we are. And that was on the 20th of November. So not that long ago, Israel and Syria are fighting this sort of ongoing frictional war, and it's been going on now for years. It's going to reach a conclusion at some point. Okay. So what about Israel and the Palestinians? This is getting even closer to home. I mean, Syria is close to on the border of northern Israel, but the Palestinians are right there, aren't they, and on the Gaza Strip. And you've not only got the Palestinians who are clearly under Hamas wanting Israel to come to an end, but there's also Hezbollah, who are based in Tyre in Lebanon, who also want to bring Israel to an end. So there's two terrorist groups absolutely in and amongst, or very, very closely entwined into Israel. So what passages are there that talk about Israel's perspective to those people who live really close to them? Forget about Russia being miles away for a minute. Those who are right in amongst them. Well, I believe in Psalm 83. We have got a description of something also that must happen in relation to Israel and her nearby neighbours. In Psalm 83 and verse 4, it says, "Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence." Yes, this was their unanimous decision. They signed a treaty as allies against you. These Edomites and Ishmaelites, Moabites and Hagrites, Gebalites, Ammonites and Amalekites, and people from Philistia and Tyre. Assyria has joined them too. So there's this whole bunch of people who are mentioned in relation to Israel. And the funny thing is, none of them, apart from Assyria, who we'll cover later, all the rest of them are not nations, they're tribes. They're all of them tribes. And they're all of them very, very, very close to Israel. I'll show you where all of them are on the map. But it's almost like they've all got together with a unanimous decision to wipe Israel off the map. That's what God says that they're going to do. And interestingly, there's two people mentioned here, Philistia and Tyre. The people of Philistia and Tyre. And Philistia is exactly where the Philistines were, which is exactly where the modern-day Gaza Strip is, which is exactly where Hamas, who want to destroy Israel, live. And Tyre, I've already mentioned Tyre, the ancient capital city of Phoenicia, but that is exactly where Hezbollah's base is. And Hezbollah, who are backed by Iran, armed with 135,000 rockets, Israel reckons, all pointed at Israel, want also to bring Israel to an end. And remarkably, those two are singled out at the end of this passage here. But if you put all of those strange names on a map and say, well, where are the Hagarites? Where are the Gebalites? Where are the Moabites? Where is Philistia and Tyre? Where are all these people? Then you get a map which is slightly blurred and look at it like this, because look at them all. Gebal, there's Assyria, there's Tyre, Philistia, Ammon, Moab, Edom, Ishmaelites, Hagarenes. They're all smack in and around Israel. Every last one of them borders Israel. And therefore, something has to happen to fulfill Psalm 83 that brings a conflict, I believe, between Israel and her surrounding neighbours. And that hasn't happened yet, but that's the bit that comes next. The bit that comes next is some inner ring war around Israel here, which Israel wins and overcomes, but is left severely damaged because, as we've said, northern Israel gets hit by the Syrian situation here. But all of that is still to take place. And I've covered this before with you. I've covered everything with you 100 times. But here we are, look, in Zechariah chapter 12, where it says, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about. This is a really important word to get your head around, because roundabout doesn't mean a roundabout. It means close by or nearby. God in Zechariah 12 actually is singling out people that are nearby. If you've got a modern version, it will say nearby. What does the AV say? Let's look at the AV. I've forgotten what it says. Let's see what it says. Zechariah 12. Yeah, it says round about. Verse 2, I make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about. It is nearby, close by. That's exactly what it means. In that day, it says in verse 6, I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf, and they will devour all the people that are round about on the right hand and on the left. So what God says is, the governors of Judah, the rulers of southern Israel, i.e. where Jerusalem is and so on, they're going to be like a torch that sets fire to the people that are round about, exactly the people that are round about at the minute mentioned in Psalm 83. Do you see what we're being told here? If you want to do a bit of study on this word roundabout, it comes up a few times. And here is another one. In Ezekiel 28 verse 24, where it says, there will be no more a pricking briar unto the house of Israel, nor any grieving thorn of all those that are round about. In other words, those people, those tribes, the Hamases, the Syrians, the Hezbollahs, the Palestinians in general, they're all provoking and prodding Israel, aren't they? It's like a pricking briar, and God says that the pricking briars will be removed, and Zechariah 12 says, actually, the people round about are going to get burnt up. They're going to be removed. And Psalm 83 says that they're all going to get in a big gang and come to defeat Israel. But Israel wins that first initial inner ring conflict. So are we seeing any headlines that talk about this ongoing situation that we have of pricking briars around Israel. So this was Israel News, June the 20th, last year, 2019. Israel prepares for an all-out multi-front war. The Israeli Air Force conducted a vast military exercise last night designed to simulate an all-out war in multiple theatres of operation. And it goes on and explains where that's going to be. But look here, down the bottom, the main focus remained Israel's northern frontier, where the Islamic Republic of Iran maintains a vast array of military means for the declared purpose of annihilating the Jewish state. If that isn't Psalm 83 in this particular news article, I don't know what is. And they're preparing for the northern front. And Isaiah 17 says, the north of Israel will become like a grain field. With 100 and something thousand rockets lobbed in, that's exactly what it would end up looking like. Hamas conducts massive surprise drill simulating Israeli Defence Force incursion into Gaza. That was July the 9th. Palestinian and Israeli police clash at Jerusalem holy site. That was August the 11th, 2019. Jerusalem becoming, a major issue in the middle of the year. Palestinian President Abbas, millions of fighters will take over Jerusalem. That's August the 23rd, he said that. Palestinian Authority claims sovereignty over the entire West Bank. That was in September the 2nd, which then led Israel to announce some statements as well about the West Bank, and also President Trump as well, which we'll get on to in just a second. Jordanians say, now this is interesting because Jordan comes under some of the tribes of Edom that were mentioned in Psalm 83, and we sort of think of Jordan as being on side with Israel. And they did sign a peace treaty, I think it was back in the 90s, but Jordanians say a 25-year peace with Israel is cold and getting colder. And actually the tensions are building now between Israel and Jordan as well. They will actually side against Israel in that inner ring war that's coming. A Gaza barrage, IDF strikes Hamas targets after 10 rockets launched at Israel. The Gaza ministry reports 1 dead. That was in Haaretz, November the 2nd, only a few months ago. IDF's 212th Division drills for war with Hezbollah. They're the ones based in Lebanon. That was in the Jerusalem Post. That was just a few weeks ago on December the 5th. So we're seeing surely all of the things that we would expect to see in and around Israel, both from Syria, both from the Palestinians, and of course by Russia over in the distance there, but to swoop in after the inner ring war is completed. But what about Israel and America and also the Gulf states? And why have I grouped the USA and the Gulf states together? Somebody tell me, why have we put the Gulf? Yeah, the King of the South and the Young Lions. So we've got Sheba and Dedan and the Young Lions and Tarshish mentioned in Ezekiel. Well, here it is, look, Ezekiel 38 verse 13. So this is the opposing force to Russia. And this is the outer ring war. So after the inner ring war is all over, there is then a situation where Israel, as Ezekiel 38 says, is recovering from war. And it's at that point, when Israel is existing, there could be a peace agreement at this point. But basically, this is the opposing force to Russia and its other outer ring nations like Iran that come against Israel. But here's the opposing force. This is Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, which we know is Britain, and all of its young lions. That's talking about America and Canada and Australia and so on. They say to you, Gog, Russian ruler, have you come to take a spoil, to take a prey, to bear away silver and gold, to take away cattle and substance, to take a great spoil? So basically, these nations here Saudi Arabia is Sheba and Dedan, Tarshish is Britain, and the Young Lions are the US and the UK predominantly. Sorry, the US and Canada predominantly. These people are saying to Russia, to the Gog in the future, why are you doing what you're doing? But it doesn't really sound like they're fighting against Russia. It sounds as if they're just asking questions. But from this verse, we surely would expect Saudi Arabia, Britain and America to be on side with Israel and not on side with Russia, wouldn't we? Well, what sort of statements have we seen? Well, here's the first one. So I'm just going to show you a video clip here of President Trump making yet another statement about his support for Israel. Do you remember last year we were looking at what? What was the big news last year? Moving the embassy, saying that the Jerusalem is Israel's capital, winding everybody up. This year he's done two other things. And here's one in relation to the Golan Heights. This is the thinking about March last year.
Today I am taking historic action to promote Israel's ability to defend itself and really to have a very powerful, very strong national security, which they're entitled to have. In a moment, I will sign a presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereign right over the Golan Heights. The state of Israel took control of the Golan Heights in 1967 to safeguard its security from external threats. Today, aggressive action by Iran and terrorist groups in southern Syria, including Hezbollah, continue to make the Golan Heights a potential launching ground for attacks against Israel.
So there's the Golan Heights, and then only a month or two ago, President Trump made a statement about the West Bank, and this is what happened in relation to that.
The international community largely considers the establishment of Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories as illegal and violating an article of the Fourth Geneva Convention that does not allow the occupying power to transfer its own population to the territory it occupies. Israel claims it has not violated the international law because Israeli citizens have not been transferred to the settlements. Pompeo said U.S. administrations have changed their stance over the decades and that the Trump administration is now breaking away from the Obama administration's approach.
After carefully studying all sides of the legal debate, this administration agrees with President Reagan. The establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the West Bank is not, per se, inconsistent with international law.
So we see all the focus over the last 18 months being on Israel and Jerusalem. All this stuff is preparing the nations to come into conflict. And this was an interesting headline. Look, in the Times, February last year, Sunni Arabs, this is the Gulf Arabs around the Sheba Dedan area. So the Sunni Arabs and Israelis close ranks against Iran. So what we're seeing here is Sheba and Dedan lining up with Israel. It's exactly what Ezekiel 38 verse 13 says. Israel opens an office in Amman as ties with the Gulf states grow. So the thing to look out for in the press is anything that says Israel and Gulf states, Israel and Saudi Arabia, and you'll see that Israel is working. You would imagine, wouldn't you, that Israel wouldn't be close with Arabs. You'd think, well, they all hate each other. But the thing is, these Gulf states are arch enemies of Iran. And whoever is my enemy's enemy is my friend. Is that right? Something along those lines. So basically, these Gulf states are aligning themselves to Israel because they're all against Iran. Exactly what the Bible said would happen. So let's have a look at just a few slides, just through Russia's eyes. Now, all of that was to do with Israel. Lots and lots going on with Israel in 2019. What about Russia? So let's group all this little lot together. So we've got Russia and Iran, Russia and Turkey, Russia and Libya. what do we see happening in that regard, and why have we grouped that little lot together? Well, we've grouped that little lot together because in Ezekiel 38, Gog doesn't come down on his own with his own Russian army. Oh, no, no, no. They get a whole crowd coming down. The outer ring that descends on Israel after the inner ring war is enormous. And all of these, none of them touch the border of Israel. They're all miles away. But after the inner ring war and the defeat of Syria and the ending of Damascus, there's a huge void that's left, and into that void comes storming in these nations. Russia at the head, then Persia, who's Iran, Ethiopia, which is actually modern-day Sudan when you look at it, more than modern-day Ethiopia, Libya, Togarmah, which is currently modern-day Turkey. And so we're seeing an alliance. I know that John Thomas said that Turkey would be almost overcome by Russia and be defeated by Russia. I don't actually think that. I actually think rather than Turkey being defeated by Russia, I believe that Turkey is an ally of Russia, because this doesn't say Togarmah is defeated by Russia, it says they're an ally of Russia. And so since I started the World Watch back in 2003, I've been looking for headlines that say Turkey is allying itself to Russia. And obviously Iran and Libya and other nations allying themselves to Russia. Which is why, surely, headlines like this are just amazing. Because it says, Russia, Turkey and Iran hold a rival conference. This was in Euronews, February the 14th, last year. And there they all are. Look, this is a picture of Ezekiel 38. They've just said, oh, let's get together and do a photo opportunity so Christadelphians who are watching can see that we're right at the end. It's lovely of them to do that. And here they all are. And this was while the US-sponsored conference focusing on Iran was gathering its nations around saying, oh, don't we all hate Iran? Oh, yes, we all hate Iran. While they're all gathering together saying, no, we don't, we're all friends. Look at us, we're powerful. Turkish troops begin training on Russia's 7-400 missile shield. Now, this is really winding up the situation because Russia is supplying a NATO member, i.e. Turkey, with sophisticated weapons that can bring down US, UK planes. But Turkey's supposed to be on side with us. It's in NATO. But because of all the stuff that's been going on in the Middle East, Turkey has turned to Russia. So this is a major, major announcement. This was in the Times, March the 13th. Leaked documents reveal Russian effort to exert influence in Africa. This was on July the 11th. Russia is seeking to bolster its presence in at least 13 countries across Africa by building relations with existing rulers and striking military deals. So Russia's eyes are way into Africa, exactly what the Bible said, especially in northern Africa. Turkey defies NATO with first shipment of Russian missiles. That was in the Times in July. Russia and Iran to face Western navies in the Gulf. Russia and Iran are to hold joint naval exercises around the Strait of Hormuz, raising the risk of a dangerous confrontation with Western forces who are in the Gulf, because there's Britain and America in the Gulf, and now we've got Russia and Iran peddling up and down the Gulf, where 20% of the world's oil supplies are going backwards and forwards. Turkey's Erdogan visits Russian air show as Putin's guest. This is exactly what it says in Ezekiel 38, that they're going to work together, and he says, come and be my friend and I'll show you some serious military hardware. Putin to carve up Syria after Erdogan snubs America. Russian, Turkish, Iranian press event denounce America. That was in Reuters on October the 23rd. Again, there they all are for us, lined up. They keep getting together just to make the point. It's really good of them. Libyan officials collect evidence of Russian fighters in war. So if you start, I haven't got time to go into all this properly, but if you look for Libya and Russia's involvement over the last few months, it's off the scale. And it's exactly the nation that was highlighted in Ezekiel 38. And it's the one nation that's been missing of Russian involvement that's suddenly sparked up in the last 6 months. So I think it's fair to say that Russia is definitely allying itself with the nations that the Bible talked about there. But on the other hand, we would expect the opposite to be happening between Russia and America, because America is part of the King of the South. So Russia is part of King of the North, America is part of King of the South. You think, well, America isn't South, how does that work? But America is South because all its bases in the Middle East are down here, south of Israel in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, what headlines can we see in relation to that? We've already looked at this particular verse in Daniel 11 verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south will militarily provoke the king of the north. We know that. This is basically Russia versus the main king of the south, which of course is America. So let's look at some of these headlines. America to withdraw from nuclear arms treaty with Russia. That was Washington Post in February last year. Putin says Russia will target America if it places missiles in Europe. Does this sound like Russia and America are falling out? King of the North versus King of the South? Russia Defense Ministry boasts about revived military power. That was in the Associated Press. They've created a highly mobile force capable of projecting power to distant areas. Moscow increasingly ready for major military confrontation. Eurasia Daily Monitor in March. Putin vows to strengthen Russia's armed forces. This is all about Russia getting ready and being prepared for the conflict that God says is coming. Risk of nuclear war now is the highest since World War II. This was in Reuters back in May. The risks of the use of nuclear weapons for some of the factors I pointed out are now higher than at any time since World War II. Russia resurrects mass mobilisation, bit of a tongue twister. Russians are set to return once again to mass mobilisation. Almost the entire population, as well as every sector of the state economy, is geared towards an all-out military conflict. It's almost a state policy in Russia. This is what's been going on this year. The absolute preparedness of this country, of Russia I should say, of getting ready for war. Putin signs law that suspends the INF treaty. So this was a nuclear pact between America and Russia, which Putin has suspended. That was in July. The US pulls out of Cold War era pact with Russia. So there's another pact gone down the drain that they signed back in the days of Reagan. All of it's been unraveling in the last 12 months, one after the other. Russia set to unleash terrifying new stealth bomber as World War III fears grow. That was in the Metro while I was reading it on the train in London. Russia to conduct sweeping drills of its nuclear forces in the Associated Press in October. The Defence Ministry said that the 3-day exercise will begin Tuesday and involve 12,000 troops, 213 missile launchers, 105 aircraft, 15 surface warships and 5 submarines. It's a good day out, isn't it, for them there? So they're all getting ready. Putin's expansionism in Africa and the Middle East, we've talked about that, but Russian power has expanded and brought countries in the Middle East and Africa into its orbit. In other words, it's suddenly in the last few years brought all these nations into its sphere of influence. NATO is preparing for war, says Russia's top general. So surely when we look at what's going on with Russia, we can see the preparing for what God has told us to look for. Because Ezekiel says in verse 30, in Ezekiel 38, prepare for war. Basically, get your army ready and act as a guard or a protector to those nations that are going to come and fight with you against Israel. It's what we've seen happening, especially over the last 12 months. Now, there's another subplot with all of it. It's a big old jigsaw puzzle, this, isn't it, of prophecy. And there's another jigsaw puzzle going on down here, and this is between the Ayatollah in Iran and the king of Saudi Arabia. And you might say, where does that come into Bible prophecy, this whole Iran versus Saudi Arabia thing? Is it there in the Bible? And it is. It's super significant, especially in relation to what we're seeing happening at the moment with Iran. So let me just show you a very, very interesting little passage here in relation to Iran and Saudi Arabia, because it's a major part of the story of the final events leading up to the very, very end. In fact, while we go, it's on the screen, but quickly have a look at Isaiah chapter 21. So look, Isaiah 21, this is a chapter that is not out of context, because everything from Isaiah 13 all the way to Isaiah 24 are a list of tribulations or burdens that come on planet Earth at the time of the end that culminate in the total and utter destruction of civilization as we know it. Read Isaiah 24 when you get home. It is an incredible picture what comes at the end. But one of the burdens that comes on planet Earth here in Isaiah 21 is something called the burden of the desert of the sea. As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. Well, where is this land? Where's this great whirlwind coming from? And why is it called the burden of the desert of the sea? Well, it says in verse 2, a grievous vision is declared unto me, the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media, all the sighing thereof have I made to cease. Therefore, says Isaiah, who sees this terrible vision, he says, my loins are filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold upon me as the pangs of a woman that is in travail. I was bowed down at the hearing of it. I was dismayed at the seeing of it. He's absolutely distraught about what he sees, this vision given to Isaiah that happens at the very end of time. Now look, the interesting thing is here that we've got the desert of the sea, so there's a sea involved. It comes from a sort of a desert area and a terrible land, and it's a grievous vision, and it's something to do with treacherous deals being made, and a treacherous deal seems to sort of unravel because it wasn't a true deal, it was a treacherous deal. And then when the treacherous deal comes to an end, we've got this go up, O Elam, and besiege, O Media. Now I ask you, where is Elam and where is Media? Anybody want to tell me where Elam and Media are? Iran is the right answer, and you've just won a small prize. I'll give you that at the end. No. So here is a map of Elam and Media. All right, so this here is the Persian Gulf. Ah, interesting. And here is the Strait of Hormuz, where all the oil is passing through. This is the choke point where Iran says, we're going to cause you a whole bunch of trouble by blocking ships, because you've got to get through quite a narrow gap here. And Elam, this is southwest Iran, and the Medes are up here in what we would now call central Iran. And here is the sea. So when it says the burden of the desert of the sea, well, it can't be a sea other than the Persian Gulf. That's the only sea next to Elam. It has to be the Persian Gulf. So God tells us that there's a whole bunch of trouble coming around the Persian Gulf. And it comes from this land here, which is called, this, what does it say? The terrible land. Interestingly, this side of the sea is desert, and all of this is Saudi Arabia, which is also desert. This is basically God saying, go and look at this area because there's great trouble. In fact, it says that Elam is going to besiege and rise up. And the word besiege literally means to lay siege to something. It's actually about them causing a constriction. The word besiege means to actually cause a constriction. And that's exactly what Iran is threatening to do. It's threatening to besiege the sea here and cause a constriction, stop the flow of oil going through that area. Now, amazingly, of course, you remember this that I'm going to show you. This is a video clip of Iran from this terrible land here. In fact, the missiles were fired exactly from the territory of Elam. Where did it fire? I'm not talking about yesterday. I'm talking about in the middle of last year. Where did they fire missiles? Do you remember?
Oil field in Saudi Arabia.
In the oil fields in Saudi Arabia.
Tonight, U.S. intelligence indicates the unprecedented attack on Saudi oil fields originated from Iran, using a combination of low-altitude cruise missiles and drones to evade radar, two U.S. officials tell NBC News. They say the missiles were fired from at least one location in western Iran.
You see, it's all been building up, hasn't it? Isaiah 21 is part of the story. And as Isaiah says, my heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure has turned to fear in me. He saw what is still to come in this area. The Gulf is a huge issue, and it's another one of the 10 burdens that will impact the world. Another of the burdens back earlier on in Isaiah 13 talks about God stirring up the Medes. We look at this and say, "Oh, this is ancient history. This is about Babylon and the Medes and the Persians." Right? This is all about 600 BC. It's not about now. It absolutely is about now, because if you read about Isaiah 13, it says about 3 times the day of the Lord is coming. It talks about the stars going dark and the sun going dark. It talks about God shaking the whole earth terribly. And it also talks about Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And actually, yeah, Babylon was never rebuilt, but it was never destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I actually think the land of Iraq is going to end up with the sort of destruction that came on Sodom and Gomorrah. But the point is this. In verse 17, it says that I will stir up the Medes. The Medes, God says, are going to get stirred up. And who are the Medes? The Iranians. The Iranians are going to be stirred up. And look at them. They don't care about silver and gold. They care nothing for Trump's economic package, which is his answer to all things, his money. This God says they won't care about that. In fact, the deal is a treacherous deal. They care nothing for the money. All they care about is their ideology, in other words. And look, their bows will dash the young men to pieces. Their bows is clearly a reference to their bows and arrows, their missiles. That's exactly what this is talking about. Their missiles will dash the young men to pieces. They've got no pity even on children. Care nothing about it. There is great, great trouble that is coming.
Fury in Tehran today. Shouts of death to America. There's a lot we don't know about how Iran will respond, but it's been humiliated, and it will certainly seek revenge one way or another. But how? It has many options, because over 40 years it's invested heavily in proxies to export power and influence. In Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, there are groups which could act on its behalf.
Iran has the ability to retaliate asymmetrically.
So we know, don't we, because this is just in the last few days, isn't it, that Iran has been dragged into this conflict that's going on right now. And interestingly, look here. Do you remember this in Psalm 83? We know we listed out all these nations, the Edomites, Ishmaelites, who are all against Israel. There's one nation that's mentioned with them. So this is the inner ring war of peoples that are close roundabout to Israel. And there's a full stop, and then God says, by the way, Assyria has also joined them. Assyria, a far-off nation, has also joined the inner ring nations, this far-off nation has supported them. And if you go and have a look and see where Assyria was at the time that this was written, look, here's Elam. Assyria did cover an enormous territory. This is in the 7th and 8th century BC. But look, it actually went all the way right down to where the very area that God has talked about as being involved in the conflict down here over the Persian Gulf. So Iran could well be what God is talking about when he means, because Persia didn't exist when Psalm 83 was written. It wasn't even a nation. It's the only way of properly trying to describe that area in terms of Psalm 83 would be to say Assyria.
Qasem Soleimani's main project was to surround Israel by Iranian proxies, and he was successful, setting up powerful militias operating in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas operating in Gaza.
I can say that with what has happened to Qasem Soleimani, he is the martyr of Jerusalem. He is the martyr of Jerusalem. He is the martyr of Jerusalem.
So that's Soleimani, who got killed, wasn't it, just a couple of days ago? It feels like a lifetime ago because I've been watching it so much. But when was it? Friday, of course. So this man was the key mastermind behind arming Hezbollah, the Hamas, and people who hate Israel. And as we know, Trump decided to take him out. Now, as of today, we know that Iran last night fired some 12 or so missiles at US bases in Iraq. And President Trump right now is sort of gloating this evening.
Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases.
President Trump right now is sort of gloating this evening, saying, look, it's all pretty much over, everything's finished. It couldn't be further from the truth, because the Bible says all of these things that we've been talking about are still to happen. So he's feeling he's got away with it. But he most categorically has not got away with it. He can cry peace and safety all he likes. The point is, destruction is going to come. And Iran has not finished, I don't believe. It can't have finished, because Isaiah 17, Isaiah 21, all of Psalm 83, Zechariah 12 is all to happen, and everything's built up to this point of tension. And maybe it all diffuses and goes away. Or maybe like the contractions of a woman in labour, the contractions that seem to be getting closer and more ferocious, another greater calamity is about to come. And my view is that once the contractions start coming, I don't know whether you feel that the world's in contractions and in labour. It feels like it, doesn't it? Now that's underway, nothing is going to stop it. Okay, so the last couple of minutes, and you might say maybe I should have spent all evening talking about Boris Johnson and Brexit. Do you know what? It's part of the jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? Britain leaving Europe, absolutely. But it's just another part of the overall jigsaw puzzle. And we get all excited about it because we're in the UK, and it is definitely a super important part of what we've long expected to see, and another great big piece in that puzzle that has been sorted out. But I'm not going to spend hours on this, you'll be glad to know. But suffice to say, again, John Thomas, unbelievably, I think, God must have really been helping him to unlock this through his reading of the scriptures. He says, when I come to unfold these things, the reader will see why Britain is not included in the 10 toes. That's of Nebuchadnezzar's image. She is reserved of God to antagonise Russia. The 10 toes belong to the image as a united dominion. Hence Britain cannot be included among them. The EU didn't exist when he wrote that. Europe didn't exist in the way that we know it now when he wrote that. But he said Britain will not be part of it. And Christadelphians for 150 years, as far as I can see, have been unique in two things. They've been unique in identifying Tarshish as Britain, and they've been unique in saying that Britain will come out of the EU. And it's an incredible, it's an amazing thing, really, because if you look about false Christadelphian doctrines on the internet, you don't want to do it, but if you did, you'll read sites that say, we can tell you that Britain is, that Christadelphians have not got anything like the truth. Here's some of the things that they say. They say that Russia is going to come down into the Middle East. Well, here we are in Glasnost and Perestroika. Here we are with Gorbachev shaking hands with whoever was president at the time. Here we are with peace treaties. Christadelphians are off their minds to think that Russia would ever come down into the Middle East. And here's another one that they tell you. This is a laugh a minute, because they say that Britain will come out of the EU. And guess what? We've just joined it, and we're in, and we're all friends. And there they are, telling us that they're going to leave. Well, I wonder who's had the last laugh. The last laugh isn't our last laugh. It's God, who laughs in derision at those who don't believe his word. This man got it absolutely right. And the British lion did roar. Boris is there for Brexit. The lion and the young lions, we know all of this from Ezekiel 38. It's happening in front of our eyes. And God's pulled us out, maybe just in the nick of time before this whole thing, goes up. And almost as if to say to us, you were right all along, just before Johnson gets into power, there's his headline in the Times, Cornish tin found in Israel is hard evidence of trade links. So there is, because John Thomas found the link of Tarshish because of tin. It's another story, but there is tin found, Cornish tin found in Israel, and the definitive link between Tarshish and Israel and the trading that went on was found just a few months before Britain finally pull out. What happens next is a whole enormous story, and basically John Thomas said it's about the 10 toes, and I'm not going to do that now because I'm running out of energy. So we'll have to do all this another time. But here's what I think as a picture summarises what might come next. So effectively, Britain comes out of Europe, and we might think, oh, that's great, we're out of Europe, and that's what God said is going to happen. But something I believe is going to happen to the EU. It's going to cause an enormous amount of destabilisation of the EU as we know it. At the minute, it's a huge bloated empire of thing with 27 countries. Britain coming out will cause, it's a bit like ripping something that's embedded in, what do you call those horrible things that you get that are sort of entwined into your skin, and you pull it out, and what am I thinking of? A gangly thing. We call it a gangly thing. You pull it out. It's a bit like we're all entwined into Europe. When we finally come out, it's going to cause an enormous amount of grief. And what I think is going to happen, there's this great division that's going to happen, and it will cause the current institution of the EU to fall apart. But out of that will rise 10 nations, almost certainly, from Revelation 17, that unite together and form a new Holy Roman Empire, because that's what Revelation 17 says will exist when Christ is on earth with the saints. This is still something to happen. And if you don't think that's true, France and Germany proposed EU overhaul after Brexit upheaval. This was in December, 2 or 3 weeks ago. European Union leaders fear that regional and political rifts could tear apart a project they credit with keeping peace and prosperity on the continent, including in Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Soviet bloc. Conference on the future of Europe was necessary to make the EU more united and sovereign. It's exactly what Revelation 17 says is basically coming. So look. These faces staring at us on this screen now might possibly be the faces that are in power when Christ returns. There is nothing really still to happen that means it must happen before Jesus Christ appears. But in summary, I do honestly think we're going to see a lot more trouble from Iran. It is not over. The situation in the Gulf, and what almost certainly is going to happen at some point is that this man here orders his militias and proxy armies around Israel to begin fighting Israel. And Netanyahu went on the news at about 6 o'clock this evening saying if Iran makes one move against us by sending its proxy armies firing missiles, we will utterly and completely destroy them. And that is the story. And this then causes this inner ring war to happen. After that, Israel has potentially a bit of a time of peace as it recovers, maybe even makes a peace agreement, but there's a void that's left, and into that void come these surrounding nations, and some point in amongst all of that, Jesus Christ appears in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. We don't know that day, but surely, brothers and sisters, with everything going on, we really genuinely should be absolutely on our toes waiting for the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening.
We are witnessing a wave of demonstrations around the world. From the Middle East to Latin America and the Caribbean.
Bienvenido a la generación del Yo no me dejo, los quiero Puerto Rico.
From Europe to Africa and Asia. It is clear that there is a growing deficit of trust between people and political establishments and rising threats to the social contract.